The city streets were buzzing with life, people rushing past, lost in their own worlds. But in the midst of it all, a homeless man sat quietly on the sidewalk, his eyes scanning the crowd. His clothes were worn, his hands rough from the cold pavement, but there was a certain kindness in his gaze. He wasn't asking for much, just $1, just enough to get by for the day. And then, through the sea of faces, he spotted someone different. A man in a simple black jacket, walking with an easy, unassuming stride. At first, he seemed like just another passerby, but there was something familiar about him. As he got closer, the homeless man hesitated for a second before gathering the courage to speak. "Hey, sir, do you have $1 to spare?" The man stopped. He turned to face him, and for a moment, there was silence. Then the homeless man's eyes widened in disbelief. This wasn't just anyone. It was Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star, the John Wick himself. Most celebrities would have kept walking. Maybe they'd offer a polite smile, a quick nod, or even dig into their pockets for some spare change. But what Keanu did next was something no one could have expected. No cameras, no entourage, just one human being facing another in need. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. What happened next was beyond generosity. It was something deeper, something that left even the homeless man speechless. And when you hear what Keanu did, you might just see him in a whole new light. Stay tuned, because this is one story you won't want to miss. Keanu didn't just reach into his pocket for some spare change. Instead, he crouched down, leveling his gaze with the man sitting on the sidewalk. There was no judgment in his eyes, no hesitation, just genuine curiosity and warmth. "What's your name?" Keanu asked, his voice calm and sincere. The homeless man, caught off guard, shifted uncomfortably. People usually ignored him, threw him a few coins, or walked away quickly. But this was different. Michael," he finally answered. Keanu nodded, as if he was taking a moment to really see him, not just as someone on the streets, but as a person with a story. "Michael," he repeated, "what's your story?" Michael hesitated. He hadn't been asked that in years. His mind raced. Why was Keanu Reeves, a Hollywood icon, asking about his life? And more importantly, what was he planning to do next? The answer would be something no one saw coming. Michael hesitated, his fingers tightening around the frayed edges of his coat. Most people didn't care to hear his story, and those who did usually walked away before he could finish. But Keanu wasn't looking away. He was waiting, patient, as if nothing else in the world mattered at that moment. With a deep breath, Michael finally spoke. "It's a long story," he muttered, his voice rough. Keanu simply nodded. "I've got time." Michael glanced around at the passing crowd, people moving fast, avoiding eye contact, wrapped up in their own lives. He used to be one of them, a man with a job, a home, a future. But life had a way of turning things upside down. He talked about the accident that changed everything, how medical bills piled up, how he lost his job, then his apartment. One thing led to another, and before he knew it, he was here, on the streets, invisible to the world. Keanu listened, really listened. No interruptions, no pity, just understanding. And when Michael finished, there was a long pause. Then Keanu did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket, but instead of money, he pulled out something else, his phone. "Michael," Keanu said, "what if we changed that?" Michael frowned. "Change what?" Keanu's lips curled into a small smile. "Everything." Michael's heart pounded. He had no idea what Keanu meant, but something in his voice told him this wasn't just another empty promise. This was real. But why? Why would a man like Keanu Reeves, someone with fame, fortune, and everything he could ever want, care about a man like him? The answer would unravel in ways Michael never expected, taking him on a journey that would change his life forever. Michael stared at Keanu, trying to process his words. Change everything. It sounded impossible. Life had been the same for so long, day after day of surviving, barely getting by. He had stopped believing in miracles a long time ago. Keanu tapped a few things on his phone and then looked back up. "Come with me," he said, standing up and offering his hand. Michael hesitated. People had made promises before, promises to help, to get him back on his feet. None of them ever followed through. But something about Keanu was different. His eyes weren't filled with empty words, they held something else. Conviction. Slowly, Michael reached up and took his hand. As he pulled himself to his feet, he could feel the weight of years pressing down on him. They started walking, weaving through the crowd. Michael could feel people staring, confused by the sight of a famous movie star and a homeless man side by side. But Keanu didn't seem to notice or care. Minutes later, they stopped in front of a small diner. The warm glow from inside spilled onto the street. "Let's eat," Keanu said, pushing the door open. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. Michael hadn't had a hot meal in days. As they sat down, a waitress approached, eyes flicking between them curiously. Keanu smiled. "Whatever he wants, put it on my tab." Michael stared at the menu, overwhelmed. He had forgotten what it felt like to order food without counting coins. But as he looked up at Keanu, he realized this was more than just a meal. Something bigger was happening, something life-changing. But why? Why was Keanu doing this? And what was coming next? Michael hesitated for a moment before finally ordering. A simple meal, eggs, toast, and coffee. But to him, it felt like a feast. As the waitress walked away, he looked back at Keanu, still unsure why any of this was happening. Keanu leaned back in his chair, watching him carefully. "Michael," he said, his tone calm but firm, "do you want to get off the streets?" The question hit harder than expected. Of course he did. No one chose to live like this. But wanting something and believing it was possible were two different things. He had tried before. Job applications that led nowhere, shelters that were too full, promises of help that never came. Michael let out a breath. "It's not that easy," he muttered, stirring his coffee. Keanu didn't flinch. "I know," he said, "but I think I can help." Before Michael could ask what that meant, Keanu's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting slightly. Then he stood up. "Come with me," he said again, placing a few bills on the table. Michael followed him outside, stepping into the cool evening air. They walked in silence for a few blocks before stopping in front of a sleek black car parked on the curb. A man in a suit stood beside it, waiting. Michael's stomach twisted. He had seen enough in life to know when something didn't feel right. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice tense. Keanu turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Someone who can offer you more than just a meal," he said. Michael's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary act of kindness. Something bigger was at play. And whatever it was about to change everything. Michael's heart pounded as he looked between Keanu and the man in the suit. Every instinct told him to be cautious, but there was something about Keanu's steady presence that made him stay. The suited man stepped forward and extended his hand. "Michael, my name is James. I run a non-profit that helps people get back on their feet, jobs, housing, whatever it takes. Keanu told me about you." Michael blinked. "Told you about me?" He turned to Keanu, confused. "You barely know me." Keanu smiled. "I didn't need to. I see you, Michael, and I know what it's like to struggle." Michael stood there, overwhelmed. He had spent years believing no one cared, that he was just another face in the crowd. Now, a Hollywood star and a complete stranger were offering him a second chance. James handed Michael a business card. "We have a spot for you at a shelter tonight, and in the morning, we'll start working on a job. No strings attached." Michael swallowed hard. This was real. He wasn't being brushed aside or given false hope. They were offering him a way out. But then Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a key. "One more thing," he said, placing it in Michael's hand. "This is the key to a small apartment. It's yours for as long as you need it. No rent, no debt. Just a fresh start." Tears welled in Michael's eyes. For the first time in years, he believed, maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. Michael clutched the key in his hand, his fingers trembling. It felt unreal, like he was dreaming and would wake up any second back on the cold pavement. He had spent so long believing life had nothing left to offer him, and now, in a single night, everything had changed. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to figure it all out today," he said. "Just take the first step." Michael exhaled, nodding slowly. Maybe for the first time in years, he wasn't walking away with disappointment. Maybe, just maybe, things really could be different. James gestured toward the car. "Let's get you settled in. Tomorrow's a new beginning." Michael's knees nearly buckled. He stared at the key, then back at Keanu. "Why?" he whispered. James gestured toward the car. "Let's get you settled in. Tomorrow's a new beginning." As Michael climbed into the car, he glanced back at Keanu, who simply gave him a small nod. There were no cameras, no reporters, just a man who chose to help another because it was the right thing to do. The car pulled away, and Michael watched the city blur past the window. His mind raced with possibilities. He had spent years thinking no one cared, that he had faded into the background. But tonight proved him wrong. Hours later, as he stepped into the small apartment for the first time, he stood frozen in the doorway. A warm bed, a roof over his head, and a chance to start again. It was more than he ever expected. Sinking onto the bed, he let out a shaky breath. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. And somewhere, out in the city, Keanu Reeves walked away without saying a word to anyone about what he had done, because to him, kindness wasn't about being seen, it was about making a difference.